Week after week, for almost 9 months now, it has been our privilege to play host to some stellar panelists and some great thought leaders out of the world of our esteemed educators to make this lockdown of schools during this pandemic a more livable experience. What started as a simple exercise to have our teachers more familiarized with various online learning tools ended up taking a life of its own. Week after week, we have been amazed by the kind of love and attention that we have seen this particular platform getting. And for that, we stand truly humble. And for that, we have all of you to thank for. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we look at a very interesting aspect of education, that of boarding schools. For football fans out there, home and away has a very different connotation. However, today we are going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of boarding schools. I'm sure there are enough thoughts to weigh in on both sides. We have a stellar panel lined up for you. So without much ado, we shall start with that. Before I start the panel discussion, we do have a short presentation for you. I personally went to a non-residential school. I schooled from home. However, I did my engineering from a hostel institution. One of the greatest learnings that I had in the hostel was the importance of languages. The first day in engineering hostel, I remember the number of languages that hit me at once was greater than whatever I had experienced in my entire life leading up to that point. We at Notebook keep language as our center of attention. We try and use various languages, to ensure that learning can be delivered in a vernacular tongue to students who are outside our metro cities, who perhaps find it much easier to grasp various concepts when explained to them in their language. Well, keeping with that, we try to create videos that address these various lingual needs of our students. I will play a short montage of a few of our bilingual videos before we start today's session.
Hello everyone. We are back with another interesting lesson from mathematics, and today we're going to learn a very important rule in maths which will make our problem solving much easy and accurate. We are going to learn about the BODMAS rule. The BODMAS rule is used to put operations in order.
ઉદાહરણ તરીકે જો તમે કોઈ ફેક્ટરીની મુલાકાત લો છો તો આપ જોશો કે પહેલા ઉત્પાદન થાય છે, પછી પેકેજિંગ થાય છે, ત્યારબાદ ગુણવત્તા માટે ચેક થાય છે
और फिर उसे भेजा जाता है। ये सब एक सेट यानी निर्धारित क्रम में होता है। अगर ये सेट ऑर्डर बाधित होता है
तर संपूर्ण प्रक्रिया बिघडून जाते। त्याचप्रमाणे गणितामध्ये आपल्याकडे सेट ऑर्डर आहे।
ଚାଲନ୍ତୁ ସରଳ ଭାବେ ଆରମ୍ଭ କରିବା। ପ୍ରଥମେ ଆମ ପାଖେ ସଂଖ୍ୟା ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ଅଛି ଏବଂ ଏହା ପରେ
ఆ తర్వాత ఆపరేటర్లు ప్రాథమికంగా చిహ్నాలు మనం ఏ ఆపరేషన్ చేయాలో తెలియజేయడానికి.
Let's call two of our friends to put this knowledge to test.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's how we at Notebook try to use the power of various vernacular languages to make studies more understandable and more accessible to millions of students out there. Well, with that out of the way, it is now turn to start with our first speaker. Our first speaker today is Mr. Philip Barrett. Mr. Barrett retired as the Deputy Headmaster from the illustrious Doon School in Dehradun after 44 years of serving in education across various educational institutions. Mr. Barrett served the Doon School as Housemaster, Head of Department, Dean of Activities, Dean of Student Welfare, Deputy Headmaster, Second Master, and Acting Headmaster with great distinction. He also carried out a visioning exercise for the Doon School in the year 2011 through an in-depth study of a number of British public schools and various schools in the US. He also qualified as a leadership trainer at Wellington College, UK in the year 2000. He is also an athlete, adventurer, and a naturalist, and few in the entire country are as knowledgeable about as him when it comes to residential schools. Sir, privileged to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Shubhayu, and a very good evening to you, Achin, Abhishek, the entire Notebook team, Mrs. Gupta, and Meeta. I'm very happy to see you here again, and all our guests who have tuned in. Am I audible and visible?
Shubhayu? Yes, sir. I can hear you loud and clear. We can all see you.
So, schools come in various types. They're day schools, they're residential schools, they're day come boarding schools, co-educational schools, single-sex schools, religious schools, primary schools, technical schools. It's not that one is better than the other. It's just that each one is unique in its own way, and they seek to educate children in their own unique way. Now, I was a day scholar, like Shubayu said, and but I taught in a residential school. My father went to a boarding school for his entire life. My son was a teacher's son in a residential school, so he was a almost like a half boarder. And I've taught in co-ed schools and in day schools as well. So I've seen the whole gamut of the whole every type of school, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. People are, young kids are fascinated by the concept of boarding school, and many children dream of going to a boarding school. They read books like Mallory Tars. They've studied, Tom Brown's School Days and rugby, the rugby school, Billy Bunter's, and we read William, Tom Brown's School Days, and other, British classics featuring the public school, which I don't know why it's called public, because it should be called private schools, because they were only available for the well-to-do. If you've seen a movie called Dead Poets Society, that again portrays a very different view of an American boarding school. It's again a public school. Now, we dream of those midnight feasts, those campfires, those close friendships with dorm mates, driving the housemaster's car, maybe at night, and jumping the walls to take a, slip into town to have a meal. These are all things people dream of. They say boarding schools are a home away from home. But believe you me, as someone who has lived and been in a residential school for many years, try as they might be, they are not homes away from home. No one can replicate home. These places are austere, hard places where one learns to survive and stand on their own 2 feet. At home, nobody gets up at 6 o'clock to do PT or bathe in cold water. No one jumps walls, and no one eats raw Maggie at night or sometimes cries himself to sleep. The chapatis are not hard and the beds are soft at home. It can never be like home, although we try to make it very much like home. So all this romanticism of a boarding school fades when one enters the gates. And yet thousands of students sit for these entrance exams for all these boarding schools annually. And they will do anything to get into one of these, what they call elite schools. I would say they're elite because they're not available for everyone, but they're not elitist. And as one very famous and veritable master at the Doon school said, these children will do anything to get into school, but having got into school, they'll do anything to get out of school, by which he means jump the wall. And having got out of school after class 12, they will do anything to get back into school. And so many of these children return to this school they love to play matches. They come back for Founders Day, or they come into school at the drop of a hat, any excuse. And many of them come back to teach, which I don't see much happening in a day school. A lot of boarding school kids return to teach in their schools, even if it is for a short time. Now, the history of residential schools in India, they date back to when the British were here, and they opened a number of boarding schools for the children of British other rank officers. So schools like the Lawrence School, Lovedale and Sonar came up. Then there was the Christian schools and the Anglo-Indian convents and schools like Sherwood College, the Barnes School, Devlali, St. Paul's School, Darjeeling, Weinberg Allen, Waverley Convent, the Loreto Convents, All Saints Schools, the La Martiniere Schools, the Bishop Cotton Schools, the Cambridge Hall School, just down the road from where I live, which is the alma mater of General Bipin Rawat, now the current Chief of Army Staff, or the Mountford School down south, which is the alma mater of Shashi Tharoor. Then there were the Christian schools, like the Christian Brothers schools and the St. Xavier schools, which are run by the Jesuits. These schools came up post the British public schools. And many of these schools took their early laws and their traditions from the British public schools. In fact, some of the founder headmasters were Britishers. But these schools were meant for Indian boys. Many of these schools are still doing well. They're over 150, 200 years old. And most of our residential schools are located in the hills at above 5,000 feet above sea level in order to avoid the summer heat of the Indian plains. Many of these schools, and they are the prettiest schools I've ever seen. They are havens for learning. And they give the impression of being strong academic communities. Now, at Doon, I live with 500 boys, 70 colleagues, all on a 70-acre campus, where we ate, slept, everything was there. The kitchen staff, the administrative staff, the dormitory staff. We lived and worked like a large family. And there was no place to go to after 2 p.m. There was no tuitions. After 2 p.m., work actually started. Now, after these British boarding schools, there followed in their wake a lot of schools which were set up by Indian business houses, the Birlas, the Assam Valley School, which was actually the Khaitans, the Jindals, the Aga Khan schools, the Mahendras, the Tatas, like the Pathway schools, the Sainik schools, the Motilal School of Sports, mission schools like the Chinmay Mission, the Krishnamurti Mission, like the Rishi Valley School, which is rated to be India's #1 school today. And later on, the princess colleges emerged. These were run by the Nawabs and the Rajas and the princes of India, the Maharajas, to educate children of Indian nobility. These were the Mayo College, Ajmer, the Prince of Wales College, which is now called the Rashtriya Indian Military Academy in Dehradun, Delhi College, Indore, Scindia School, Gwalior, and the Maharani Gayatri Devi College, Rajkumar colleges in Raipur and Rajkot. But the Doon School, let me tell you, was not a part of the princely colleges because they didn't cater to only the sons of the rich Indian families. The Doon School was meant for any boy, any Indian boy. And therefore, when the Doon School first started in 1935, the school had to send back some of these rich kids and send back their retinue of servants. They came on elephants and horses. We said, no, you've got to walk into school and wear the uniform that everyone else wears. So the Doon School was not a part of the early princely colleges like Mayo or Scindia. Servants were not allowed to look after boys. Now, why would a parent want to send his child away for 9 months in a year? Many reasons. First of all, if these parents were in a transferable job, or if they lived abroad, or they wanted a purely Indian education for their children, or if they lived in a part of India where there were no good schools. And very often, let me share this with you, a lot of our children from boarding schools come from broken homes where there is domestic disharmony, and parents felt that it was better for the children to get out. And so very often, and rightly so, people felt that because these schools charge high fees and paid good salaries and gave teachers wonderful accommodation, that these schools often employed the best teachers. So these are the reasons why parents send their kids to boarding schools. But there are other advantages as well. These are large schools on beautiful estates, very safe, enclosed estates, beautiful parts of the country. Most of these schools are located in Uttarakhand, in Himachal Pradesh, and in Tamil Nadu, the bulk of these great boarding schools. Some of these schools are within forests and they have beautiful gardens and lakes, and it's a lovely environment for children to grow up in. Also, children make friends and belong to a very strong fraternity and a strong alumni association and bonds after they leave school. I found it very difficult to fathom these strong bonds when I first came into Doon School. But it took me years and years to understand and appreciate how a 12-year-old comes into school and he lives for the next 6 years with a group of boys his own age. And they live through good times and bad times, through thick and thin. And after 6 years, you can imagine what the bonds are. These people nobody knows these children like the group. I say a safe environment because for 9 months, these kids are subjected to a rigorous discipline and a schedule, which starts from morning PT, regular meals, stringent rules. That's why many of our boys and girls join the armed forces from schools like this. These children are looked after by house parents who are loco parentis, and they grow up to be independent, reliant, and they are leaders. We teach them a lot of leadership. And these children have no parents to fall back on in time of trouble. That's why they have to think on their feet. They fend for themselves and they have only their own group to support them. Now, these schools also offer a variety of activities, like from horse riding to mountaineering. Every sport, every activity is offered. And many of them do the Indian ISC and CBSC exams. Character building, leadership training is the forte of these schools. And we also groom them, and these schools groom them so that they could lead free and democratic India, because these schools came up pre-independence. Many of these children developed a variety of skills in music, art, and drama, because the facilities that these institutions had to also hire the best instructors were available. Now, I was looking at a school called St. George's School up here in the hills, not far from where I live. It's a 250-year-old school. And the houses in that school are called the Martins, Cullen, Emmett, and Nugent houses. The names of these houses are because they had 5 to 6 boys who played with Dhyan at the Helsinki Olympics. That was the strength of the sports of these schools. These schools produced some of the early cricketers and the test players of India. Now, it is often felt by parents that the rigorous routine, rhythm, and rituals of boarding life will toughen children up and prepare them for a life that is in store for them. The other thing about these boarding schools is that because they attract children from all over the country, it's almost like a melting pot of cultures. As Shabayu Bas mentioned about language, not only language, but we have children of all castes, creeds, religions, all sorts of, from every state. And therefore, these schools are actually a melting pot of their integration areas. We integrate students. They're secular and egalitarian. There is no difference between the rich and the poor. Nobody even knows who the Raja's son is over here. Now, what these residential schools did not have, they tended in the early days not to focus too much on academics and grades, because the development was very holistic. There was also stories of bullying and harassment. And sometimes these children were cooped away from the hustle and bustle of life. And so therefore, they lost those worldly skills that some of the metro children in day schools have. People often state that boarding schools are too insular and cut off from the rest of the world. And therefore, the alumni of these schools tend to hang in together and relate with only themselves or other public school types. There's a sense of distrust of other schools. They don't mix enough. Things have changed, obviously, from those days. And believe you, these boarding schools are not for everybody. Some children flourish and do well, while other children just hate it. At the Doon school, I've had to get parents to take their children away from school because this was not the school that was going to bring out the best in their ward. Maybe a day school would be much better for them. Now, students from these residential schools, being from well-to-do homes and landed families who could afford the high fees, often had family businesses waiting for them after school and a college education abroad. Many of them joined the tea gardens in the 60s and 70s were full of people from public schools, because a tea planter's life resembles a boarding school life in many ways. The schedule, the discipline, the outdoors, the routine, which starts at 6 in the morning. Now, sometimes these boarding schools could not match up with the academic standards of the day school students who had access to coaching and specialized training. And therefore, one of the criticisms against the boarding school was that our kids never got into the IITs and the medical colleges and the engineering schools like day school children. After independence, a lot of good day schools and residential schools sprung up, like the modern schools, the Birla schools, the DPS group. And these good schools in metros drew students away from the boarding schools. And therefore, we found that we were not getting the creme de la creme. In the late 80s and 90s, schools like the Dhirubhai Ambani schools, the Heritage schools, the Oak Ridge schools, the TISP, the Indus group, these schools came up and took away some of the kids that would have come into the Hill schools. I attended a meeting called the TISP meeting, which is actually the Association of International Schools in India. And believe you me, I did not know till the meeting started how many international schools we have in this country, and all very, very good schools. Today, however, I think that the niche, this boarding school niche, is in danger of becoming redundant, and that the division between residential schools and day schools is becoming rather blurred. The differences between these schools are now not that clear cut. And why is this so? Parents sometimes want to keep their children near them and enjoy seeing their children grow up. I remember a parent telling me as a housemaster, she said, Mr. Barrett, you have the privilege of seeing our children grow during the best years of their lives. We don't. And it's true. I see other people's children grow up, they don't see their own children. And so therefore, one of the criticisms is that parents want their children nowadays to be with them, to see them perform in sports and drama and activities. The second is the high fees that boarding schools charge today have put them beyond the reach of the middle class. However, I must add that many boarding schools have now started their own fundraising departments and are building huge endowment schemes so that they can give scholarships and they can give students and they can get students into school that they want. That's the middle class performing kid. The other thing is that some parents want a domiciliary status for their children for it to be easier for them to join engineering and medical school. And therefore, they prefer their kids to study in the metros. Bullying and bad habits. I mean, sometimes people think you put your kid into a boarding school, he's away from the bad habits of the big city. Not true. Boarding schools too have their bad habits. And a lot of kids learn just the wrong things when they're away from home. Children have this way of showing another side of them when they're away from parents. They're free to reinvent themselves. Often, these schools breed a sort of insensitivity in the children because they have to survive this harsh treatment that is sometimes meted out to them. Although, of course, recently, I must say, there's been a huge improvement in this part of a boarding school life. Many of the boarding schools do not offer the international exams like the IB and IGCSE, which is what the modern parent in metros wants. And therefore, again, this is where a day school scores over boarding schools. Some parents feel that the boarding schools haven't moved on with the times. The IT, the robotics, the science teaching tends to be old-fashioned. The labs are old-fashioned. And therefore, they prefer a day school education where they can get the state-of-the-art stuff. Often it is felt that boarding schools live on the past reputation that they built up in the pre-independence days, and they haven't moved with the times. Again, this is not entirely true because boarding schools have, over the last 10 years, really brought about huge changes in the way they do things. And now, because of the ease of transportation, fast cars, good roads, airports all over the place, boarding schools have become almost like day schools. The helicopter parent, that is the bane of every day school, has now landed in the boarding schools, because technically you can have a parent in a boarding school every weekend. And so therefore this great advantage that boarding schools had, where parents did not meet their children for 9 months, is no longer holds true. Parents are there almost every week. Also, specialized coaching for professional courses, as I mentioned, sports and other form of co-curricular work is more available now in day schools. So why should you send your kid to a boarding school? And that is why the day boarding concept in a metro has taken off. Schools like the Sri Ram School, Delhi, the Pathway School, they offer a mixture of a day school and a boarding school. Therefore, to sum it up, as I said earlier, there's no one school that is best. It's the school that fits your need. I would sum up the 6 advantages of boarding schools. One is all activities under one roof. There is no need for the tennis club and the dramatics club and the language school, everything under one roof. Secondly, safe. It's a safe and secure environment where the children are taken care of from their medical, psychological, academic, and other needs. There is no transport issue. You don't have to move up and down to school. You just make 2 trips to school every year and 2 trips away from school. Strong bonds are developed. These kids belong to very strong alumni groups, and they pick up unique traditions and ways of doing things. They have their own lingo. They are also subjected to a holistic education which fosters self-reliance skills with a lot of leadership. And of course, these schools generally have dedicated 24/7 faculty which have come to school not to make a livelihood, but to make a living. And with that, I'm going to shut up now because I've said enough about boarding schools. I still say that if I had the choice, if I had to have my life again, I don't know where I would go. A part of me says the boarding school, and yet a part of me says I like the fact that I stayed at home. And with that, I'm going to hand this back to you, Shubhai.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that wonderful opening session. And I think you've had the best of both worlds, studying in a day school and then teaching in a boarding school for all those years. I'm sure I'm not the only one here who stands in absolute envy of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the time we move to our second speaker of the day. Our second speaker today is Achin Bhattacharyya. Achin is the founder and CEO at Notebook. A chartered accountant by training, Achin was a director at Deloitte prior to starting Notebook. He has worked in India and abroad in various senior capacities in GE, PwC, KPMG, and Deloitte. He is a fellow of the ICAI and a member of CPA Australia. He is also the recipient of the prestigious Indian Achievers Award. Achin is an avid reader and a passionate traveler with keen interests in economics, history, literature, and philosophy. He is a regular speaker at various forums and chambers of commerce and also contributes articles to numerous publications regularly. He is also on the board of some of the most renowned corporates and contributes significantly to their brand strategies. Achin, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Shubhai, am I audible?
Yeah, Achin, loud and clear.
I once again welcome all of you to today's topic, which is not only of academic significance, but also evokes an unparalleled nostalgia and emotion in all of us, especially for those who have stayed in boarding in some point of time in their academic lives, and also for those parents who miss their children while taking care of the empty nest, all by themselves in their absence, and miss them every day in all aspects of life, be it in terms of dinner table conversations or while missing the fight over TV remote. Speaking about boarding schools, and after Burrett, sir, I guess is one of the most difficult jobs. So I really wish and expect that all of you wish me luck. But it's a very nicely mentioned each and every aspect of boarding school. Hence, I'll try to keep my deliberation more from an analytical and outsider's perspective, outsider's view of it. Today's topic was about advantages and disadvantages of boarding school. I think Barrett sir mentioned both the aspects, advantages as well as some very pertinent and contemporary issues, which really makes all of us wonder that as a parent, if we have to make a choice, what should the ideal option be? Having said that, few numbers, figures, and what's happening around. let me try to share with all of you. According to a study by the Arts and Science Group of Baltimore for the Association of Boarding Schools, boarding school students succeed at significantly higher rates than private day and public school students. I'm only quoting a survey, a very recent one, especially in college and adult life. The study also found that students are more likely to earn an advanced degree and achieve faster career advancement. Now, a part of the survey was also about interacting with students, teachers, boarding school grads, and they were asked to share their views on the most important benefits. The top response was not about academics. It was about the advantages of living in a diverse, close-knit community. The opportunity to form deep friendships with students from all around, different parts of the country, and at times different parts of the world. The study also found that 78% of the boarders reported they are motivated by peers. So peer level motivation, I think this is one of the biggest advantages of boarding schools. 78%, nearly 80% peers reported that they were motivated by peers. Now these numbers were compared with the levels of peer level motivation in day schools, and that percentage was 49%. So in day schools, 49% students reported that they were really motivated by their peers, vis-a-vis almost 80% in boarding schools. Thus, living with students from diverse backgrounds and the kind of conversations, dialogues, be it in the dorm, at dinner, dining hall, be it countless options for extracurriculars, athletics, arts, community service. We all know that boarding school facilities are extensive and typically include performing art spaces, visual art studios, multiple playing fields, at times indoor court for basketball and squash, ice rink, swimming pool, fitness room. Now, many of the day schools today also offer similar facilities, no doubt about it. And Barrett also mentioned about some fantastic day schools who are doing great work around the country. But the kind of time that a boarding school student spends in the school undoubtedly provides far more opportunity to utilize those facilities. This study also found that 78% of boarding school students felt well prepared for non-academic aspects of college life, such as being able to socialize, being independent, time management. 78%. Now, compared to that, numbers in day school were around 36%. Now, these are some numbers, and I'll speak about the other side of the coin as well. There are some very interesting surveys with regard to the disadvantages part. But before that, one aspect that I'm sure all of us would agree, that boarding schools, one of the biggest advantages is that it acts as a great equalizer. Great equalizer. As Burrett also mentioned, that when you walk inside the school gate in your uniform, you leave everything behind, right? All your entitlements. So the question is that today, for many parents, for many affluent parents, both parents working, even if you could give your kids everything, should you? Does it really work for them? Or does that actually become a disadvantage later in life? Also, various aspects with regard to stress. The kind of stress that students face, but it's also mentioned about broken homes, dysfunctional families. At times for kids like that, children like that, definitely boarding schools are a saving grace, no doubt about it. The other aspect is coming to the stress, even in terms of the academic stress in terms of sheer day-to-day expectation. Now I was going through a study on advancing health equity among children, which was published by National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, which said that youths, young adults in high achieving schools form a part of the at-risk group. And now the way they have defined this at-risk group, so kids who live in poverty, foster care, dysfunctional families, definitely they are at risk. Along with that, children who are in high achieving schools, because of the sheer pressure of having to achieve, this unrelenting pressure, at times overly invested parent, sports coaches who at times wants wins to ensure the child is good, even activities which were once stress reducers like playing a musical instrument or sports today have become a means to an end. Children don't get the opportunity to enjoy it. Even if they're playing a musical instrument or they're participating in sports, they're expected to excel. Again, creating pressure. So I was going through a report by Harvard Graduate School of Education. So there's a project that they're working on, Making Caring Common Project. This report says that children are so saturated with messages about achievement in many schools and communities that parents need to be really conscious about fighting against those messages at home. The question is, why am I discussing this? Why am I discussing about stress when today's topic is boarding school? Because the second part of this report goes on to elaborate the benefits of boarding school, elaborate the benefits of children at times staying away from parents. The fact that boarding schools are an open-minded community who offer safe and supporting environment and undoubtedly a place for everyone, right? There's so much to be learned from diverse community where students from all backgrounds are welcome. And everyone is experiencing life together through a new lens. And undoubtedly they're able to connect on a deep personal level and build lasting friendships. Also, the independence and self-reliance aspect, I'm sure all of us would agree that boarding school children are far more self-reliant, far more independent, because they need to solve their daily problems themselves, by and large. And being self-reliant also has a very strong correlation with being confident. As children begin to do things small and big on their own, they will start building a more confidence in their own abilities. Boarding schools, undoubtedly, they expose children to many activities. Not only activities with regard to sports, but also might be social service, art, drama, carpentry. And another very important aspect is discipline. Like as Barrett mentioned, I think it needs no further elaboration. Waking up at 6 o'clock and taking a cold bath, that speaks for itself. And everything is regulated, be it your meal time, be it when and what you watch on TV. So these things really ensure that far more disciplined upbringing. Also the kind of social confidence it gives. The way children learn to transcend differences. Making and being a part of a group is at the core of living in a boarding school. And it really helps, even if you look at later stages, whether that be in college or being in professional lives, the ability of working in teams. And especially in today's nuclear families, when children do not get the opportunity to grow up with extended family members, with grandparents, with cousins, with relatives, with both parents working, limited holiday for working parents, even summer vacations are spent in metros. So for those children who do not get the opportunity, I think boarding schools do provide an opportunity to develop social skills, which are indispensable in later stages of life. And a far more holistic upbringing, far more holistic development, undoubtedly. And they do force you to be responsible for yourself. Because you need to be responsible for your actions. Every child is bound by a code of discipline. So undoubtedly, the fact that the boundaries are very clearly laid out, and those boundaries are universal and equally applicable for all, that also brings in a sense of justice, which helps. Now, coming to the other aspect today, when it comes to disadvantages, I think Burrett mentioned disadvantage is too strong a word, but I'll say Burrett mentioned certain aspects which I completely agree with. Apart from that, I guess it also depends up to a very large extent, because every child is different, right? There cannot be a set of rules which are applicable for everyone. At times, some children do face issues in blending in adjusting, and especially some children do not take to the regimented life of boarding school and would much rather be the master of their own free time. These children might also find it difficult, hard to reconnect with family after spending so many months away. Another aspect which I think is important, but that doesn't hold true only for boarding schools, but for all single-sex schools, and that is gender separation. As most boarding schools are either boys only or girls only, now, at times, if you look at things in a more mature manner, in a more holistic manner, as a part of a balanced growing up, at times this does pose challenges. Other risks, I think, about bullying, etc., Burrett mentioned. I went to a very interesting book in this regard, and I'm sure some of our esteemed educators have gone through it. The name of the book is Boarding School Syndrome, and it's written by Joy Chevron. Now, I was going through this book, and she has articulated in a very logical way with regard to some of the challenges that boarding school children face later in life. As a professional psychologist, now this book is an analysis of the trauma of the privileged child sent to boarding school at a young age. Innovative and challenging, this offers a very deep psychological analysis of, and especially of the long established British and colonial preparatory and public boarding school tradition. Now, according to the author, she noticed that a number of her clients who used to come to her for counseling, and they were facing various issues in their personal life, professional life, so they used to come to her for counseling. And a number of her clients were telling her that they had been to boarding school. And it's not that they blamed boarding school for all their miseries. It was just a passing reference. So they gave out many information, and among those information, one common information that she found in many of her clients was that they had been to boarding schools. They mentioned it more like a passing reference. Now, she realized that those particular people who told her that they had been to boarding school, it was a far more serious thing than what they themselves realized. And a lot of them were really traumatized, but they were quite unaware of it. They were quite unaware of the trauma. They were quite unaware of their suffering. And very often, these people come with relationship problems, difficulties in parenting their own children that occur quite late in their lives. So they don't immediately notice that boarding school had an impact on them. And many clients come with other problems. They do not realize what the role of the school was, how their foundation years really affected them, how it actually contributes to a state of disassociation, is the way she has described it, a state of disassociation, being emotionally disassociated. And according to her, boarding school children, and especially when she mentions boarding school children, her deliberation is about very, very young children, say at the age of 6 years, 7 years, being sent to boarding school. And she says these children they suffer from a state of disassociation, being emotionally disassociated with everyone. And they have consciously got into this state in order to survive in the boarding school. And in later years also, they find it difficult to emotionally associate with others. Now, the author came up with 4 categories, which she mentioned as the ABCD of boarding school syndrome. And these were aspects of trauma of being separated from parents or being sent away to boarding school at a very early age. So she compared it with bereavement, homesickness, the fact that she compared it with major bereavement in children when they are sent to boarding schools. She feels that children, they lose everything. They lose their family, their parents, their siblings, at times their pets, their home, the food they're used to, the environment they're used to. They miss their bed. And suddenly they're among strangers, completely alienated. And they have to just get on with it because there's nothing else to do. But actually what they're doing is going through a process of grief and mourning. And this is repeated every time they go home and come back to school. The trauma gets repeated. Thus, the author feels that in very young children, 6 years, 7 years, who are sent to boarding school, at times it leaves a very deep impact. But she also mentioned that for senior boarders, say age at 12, 13 onwards, who are sent to boarding school, the impact is very, very different. Because those children are comparatively more mature. They're able to much better cope with it. So I thought that this was something relevant that I wanted to share with all of you. And she also mentions the political implications, because around the world, it has been noticed that many children who went to renowned boarding schools like Eton, Harrow, and our own Doon, which Burrett very nicely described, that many of these children in later years, they grew up and at times, like for example in Eton, we see many past British Prime Ministers, even the current Boris Johnson having started from Eton. And I think many past British Prime Ministers being from the famous institution. So she mentioned that these people, the way they look at life, they tend to, at times it also acts as an advantage that they're able to emotionally disassociate themselves while taking a decision. So there are 2 sides of it. So these are some aspects that I wanted to highlight in terms of boarding school. We have a very, very experienced panel today. And I really look forward to their deliberation on this very important topic. And I'm sure that after Barrett sir's, the way Barrett sir explained the entire topic, and with the great panel that we have today, I'm sure that we will really be enlightened with the deliberation. Over to you, Shubham.
Thank you, Achin. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, wonderful comparative study of both systems of schooling. And it is now time for our discussion. We have today, like most of the weeks, a stellar panel in front of you. And it is very special in the way that we have one principal from a day boarding school and another from a boarding school for girls. We have with us Ms. Anita Gupta, who is currently serving as the principal of Raman Munjal Vidya School, who started her teaching career in the year 1988 with a focus to cater to the educational aspirations of first-generation learners. Working beyond the confines of the school, she initiated the Child Rights in You, which is the CRY Gurugram Public Action Group, and also served as the facilitator and coordinator for ASHA, a CSR initiative by Raman Munjal Foundation. Additionally, as the member and treasurer of the Quality Circle Forum of India Delhi chapter, she is dedicated to work towards the creation of a holistic educational system. She has been recognized for her contributions to the field of education and has received the national level IDA Teaching Award presented by the Indian Didactics Association. She was also the recipient of the Certificate of Excellence as part of NDTV's Pearson Teaching Award, amongst others. With strong combination of education and experience, she is committed towards the practical submission of educational learning and provide for a noble cause. Ma'am, thank you so much for making the time. It's our privilege to have you with us. We also have with us Mrs. Meeta Sharma, who is a distinguished education leader with extensive experience both in India and internationally. Earlier, she was with Maharaja Sawai Mansingh School, Jaipur, which she had led as principal. Before that, she headed the Modi School in Sikar, Rajasthan, an all-girls premier institute. Her achievements at Modi School include starting the IBDP curriculum and laying foundation of a finishing school, Modi Academy of Manners and Etiquette, in collaboration with the reputed Canadian Fishing School. Under her guidance, Modi School was awarded the affiliation to the Round Square International Organization by King Constantine of Greece at Switzerland. Besides these, she has been involved in founding the international school at Karjat, Maharashtra. She has also spent several years with the Doon School as a teacher and headed the Department of Science. She has a postgraduate certification in education pedagogies from the Institute of Education, IOE, in University College of London, UK. She is a gold medalist from Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, Meghalaya. She received formative education in Canberra, Australia. In addition to these, she is a member of the National Training Panel for the International Award for Young People, IAYP, formerly called the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. Ma'am, privileged to have you with us.
Thank you.
I will now stop my screen share. Yes, ma'am. And we can all switch on our cameras.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, Subhayu, for the wonderful introduction you have given.
Absolutely.
And at the outset, I would like to even extend my gratitude to Notebook as well as to Abhishek, who had been the pioneer in bringing me here and providing me the opportunity to be one of the members of this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for making the time, ma'am.
Thank you, Subhayu. Thank you, Abhishek. It's been a pleasure to hear Mr. Barrett, who has been a colleague at the Doon School. And yes, he said it all. And Achin has given us all the statistics pertaining to whatever he said.
Yeah. That's the good part about having Achin as a speaker. Being from a consulting background, you can count on his research on statistics.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
At the outset, I would like to hear your initial thoughts about this whole debate of, boarding school, boarding or not boarding. Ms. Gupta, if we may start with you first, ma'am.
Yeah. So I was just reminded of a quote: "A ship is always safe at the harbor, but this is not what the ship is meant for." So when we talk about boarding schools, of course, they support learning and enhance thinking among students across age groups and with different abilities and competences. To delve deeper into concepts and grasp complex ideas, leverage the power of collaborative thinking for making detailed observations, view problems as opportunities, and understand different perspectives and work together to develop clarity of thought. But one size cannot fit all. Selection of boarding school, decision of sending the child home away is responsive to the circumstances of individuals. Home is always the sweet home. There may be endless benefits of boarding schools. The coziness of home can't be competed. So I think that would suffice the initial thought. Yeah.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much. Mrs. Sharma, if we may come to you for your initial thoughts.
Thank you, Subhayu. So if I were to speak to a boarding school child, a student who's spent his or her years in a boarding school, this is what I generally hear. They tell me that is where my story began or their story began. That was the starting point of love, hope, and all dreams. That was the magical place, a place where we felt we needed to leave the place because of various reasons. But having left it, it felt even better to come back, like Mr. Barrett said. So my take, I am a very, very strong proponent of a boarding school kind of an education. My entire family, my children, as well as my husband, are boarding school products. And my take on this is boarding school really a place? Or is boarding school because the people who are over there? That is my take. So why do we consider boarding school to be a place? The boarding school may have its ups and downs and all these advantages and disadvantages because people keep moving out. When Mr. Burrett was there as the deputy headmaster of the Doon School, the boarding school was a different place. I am not saying it is bad or good at the very moment, but yes, every person makes a difference. And when people come back to the boarding school, they're actually not coming back to see the buildings or the trees that they planted or the work they did. They actually come back to meet the people. So it is people. It's basically, it's the heart, it's the person, that is what leads to a boarding school. There can be a lot of advantages, a lot of disadvantages, and boarding schools, rightly said and heard, are not everybody's cup of tea. Believe me, though my entire family has gone to a boarding school, and I am a strong proponent, as I said, of boarding schools. However, if I was to be put into a boarding school for 6 years, I would probably buckle down under pressure or maybe learn to adapt to that pressure. That is only to be seen if I've given that chance, which is, I wish it could happen, but it's not going to happen anymore. So what I say is that a boarding school is why I feel that I'm so strongly advocating for a boarding school is because I personally feel, and I have experienced, that a boarding school is really, really not an academic school, like it has been said before, but they do academics very well. You know, a boarding school, the school period, the academic period, or the learning period, the active learning period in school, academics plus all the other events, the environment is actually mirrored in the hostels or while the pastoral care is being taken, wherever it takes place. So the environment is exactly the same. So if you've left a child at 4 steps ahead, the next day you would find the child at the same place. Whereas in a day school, nothing can be generalized for that matter, but mostly it is seen that the environment at home and the environment at school cannot be mirrored. It really, really cannot be mirrored. There are different people with different value systems, and a lot of conflict also results because of this non-mirrored environment, right? Different, responsibilities, different aspirations of parents. So the environment is totally different at home as well as compared to that of a boarding school, which results in the child most of the time going 2 steps backward. So in a boarding school, the child will definitely be way, way ahead from his peer in a day school. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Like Miss Gupta said, that there is no one size that will fit all. So boarding schools actually are not for everybody. So whenever you're looking for a boarding school, or you're looking for a home away from home, or you're looking for, you're thinking or you're deliberating upon whether to send a kid to a boarding school or not, you should mentally be prepared in your mind to, to accept that a school whose mission resonates with your understanding of growing up. Now, whether it's a day school or a boarding school, both the schools have their own advantages and disadvantages, right? But if the mission of the school resonates with your understanding of what kind of education you seek for your own child, that school is going to be the best school. And having said that, if the boarding school's mission, which is holistic, all-rounded, not so academically oriented, and if you're mentally prepared not to push your child, give direction to your child, and let the child figure out his or her own direction, I think boarding school's a great place to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Ms. Meeta, because when we talk about boarding schools, it's actually not home away from home. Actually, that becomes the second home. Otherwise, also schools are the second home for the students. So they have to go out to learn something. So it's the only difference is that here in boarding schools, instead of just spending 6 to 8 hours, they spend the whole life over there, you can say. Is the life. They learn so much under the same roof, sharing living space with them. They become more considerate, accommodating, and independent because they have to adjust. There are so many people from different cultures, so many students from different culture of this different backgrounds. So under the same roof, they become the same. As Mr. Achin also had mentioned, and Mr. Philip had also mentioned that when once they enter the gates, they leave back all their tantrums, they leave back all their designations or all their social status and everything, and they become the same. So in that sense, like boarding schools definitely play a great role in making the children more understanding, more empathetic, you can say. Their interpersonal skills take a different role in that sense. Thank you.
So I would like to add to that, and I would say that I'll disagree by the statement that boarding schools are second home. Boarding schools become your first home. Your parents end up becoming your second home. This is what I would like to say, because you end up spending 9.5 months in school. And believe me, when I say so, Shubayu, and Mr. Barrett would second that even at the Doon school, during the special assembly before the vacations, the headmaster would invariably come up, every headmaster that I have worked over there, and would talk to the boys, and this would be one of the common statements saying, boys, now it's time to reconnect with your families. So it's a reconnection that they have to establish with their families, and because they've been with us for around 10 odd months, so they are the primary home. And there are many times when I get calls from parents saying, my daughter's not called me, it's been nearly a month, she's not spoken to me, and please ensure that she calls up. So they actually end up becoming second homes for those who actually fit into the school. For those who do not fit in, like Achin said, they may be trauma, they may be homesickness, but for those who do not fit in, they will never ever become the second home or a first home. The first home will continue being whatever it is. Yeah. And they would desire to go back. So that is the precisely why I'm saying that if boarding schools are not for everyone, and if the mission resonates with the mission of education for that particular family, then boarding schools are a place to be at.
Yes, I also dreamt about being in that boarding school, though I never got a chance to go. So even I was scared of even sending my daughters also away. So I kept them till the time I could. And then ultimately I have to send them to boarding schools, or you can say the colleges. And they really enjoyed the life, like sharing the same space and having everything but they learn a lot. They become really a social person in that sense, because at home they are like in the secure hands of the parents. The parents always keep guiding and telling them what they have to do, what they are supposed not to do, but there they have to take decisions. Their instincts become sharper in that sense. So boarding schools, definitely they are the different than the old traditional schools of thought, you can say, of the parents. So but yeah.
The boarding schools have actually undergone a metamorphosis. Boarding schools are not the kind of boarding schools which were there in the British era. A lot has changed. They become more accommodative. The best part of going to a boarding school, I would say, is that you end up in a dorm or in a room where you may have girls from different countries, different states across the country, and because acceptance is more a virtue than tolerance, you need to accept them. And to accept them, you need to accept their value system. You need to accept their habits, which may be very different from yours. And you have to be very, very accommodative to ensure that they are also at comfort with you and you all stay in harmony. Now, what happens when such a kind of situation develops? So there is a girl, suppose there are 6 girls in a dorm, and one is interested in playing golf, the other is interested in music, the third one has some other hobby, and they blabber. They talk about their excitement, what they did throughout the day. And you are one person who doesn't have any of those hobbies. You invariably end up learning little about everything. I do agree that boarding schools are not specialized institutes, but that's where the resonance with the mission comes in. If the parent and the child is desiring specialized education, boarding school is definitely not the place. Then they must send that child to a specialized institute.
Definitely. They are sent for a different, they are sent for a different purpose. They are sent to be more independent thinkers. They are sent to be more critical thinkers, you can say. They are sent so that they can be more collaborative in their approach. And when I'm talking of all these terms and I'm listening to you, like this reminds me of National Education Policy, which actually talks about the 21st century skills, which we need to give to our children so that they can be the global citizens. Because the world has shrunk now. So we have to prepare our children, and the boarding schools come, you can say, as a support system for making our children the global citizens. Yes, over to Subhayu.
No, I was thoroughly enjoying this. A moderator's life is made infinitely easier if the
Yeah.
discussion can happen all by itself.
No, but especially if you have a proponent who's who's like, who advocates
Yeah.
boarding school very strongly, then it's
Yeah. No, I also love the boarding schools because the kind of like the temptation of being away from home, having no scoldings, no one is there to ask you to get up. Like, of course it is there, but that is the system. Like, you become more disciplined. But at home, it's always the fear is there. Okay, now Papa is going to say this thing, Mama is going to say this thing. But there, actually, we feel that we are free. So with freedom comes the responsibility. Actually, so that is.
you are totally
Yeah. So that feeling of responsibility actually like that is a different kind of a pleasure, and which actually develop the
so
child into a grown up,
boarding school.
into a grown up with responsibility. And I think we need such kind of children in today's scenario who are responsible citizens, so that we can take the world towards totally a different direction.
No,
Yes.
so, Ms. Gupta, boarding school children also do get scoldings.
Yeah, I know. I know, but
Into the Dean of Pastoral Care's office and given an earful. There are a lot of checks and balances for them. And sometimes being with parents is much easier because you only have to deal with 2 of them. But in a boarding school, you have to deal with 70 of them. So, it has its own pros and
yeah,
cons.
it's
Uh,
definitely has
but,
its own.
you know,
Yeah.
given the COVID
Yes.
situation, I think boarding schools have to stay. Boarding schools are going to be the safest option for
Yeah.
parents, not just to live their own life and fight out their own crisis, but also to keep their children safe and
Yeah.
in a learning environment where they can thrive.
Yeah. Actually, home talks about safe and secure environment. So of course, that is what everyone looks forward. And if boarding schools can provide that safe and secure and cozy and comfortable environment, yes, of course, with its own discipline and the learning pattern, no one would like resist going to boarding school. Yes.
Ma'am, if I may just weigh in for a second here,
Yeah.
uh, I can see the very strong views on both sides. What I would like to kind of touch upon, and this comes from personal experience of having lived through hostels in my engineering, my MBA, and then seeing my siblings go into hostels. During my earlier hostel day, would be one phone room in the hostel, which would get a phone call from home. The orderly would come out and scream, "Room number 44, there's a call for you." Boy will come running from room number 44, take the call. Fast forward 3 years, there are cell phones, but they are outgoing at 12 rupees a minute, incoming at 6 rupees a minute. So there are quick 30-second phone calls saying, "Theek ho? Acha ho." And that was the phone call. Fast forward to today, there are hour-long Google Duo calls. So boarding school, which had that approach of a unity of geography, which would create a unity of culture, and therefore 30 students from various different cultural backgrounds would kind of go into the same school, come out as a very similar sort of culture, so to say. Do you think that has somewhere gotten diluted by the kind of technology that is available today?
Uh, See, Subhayu, of course, this can be a myth also. See, with technology comes so many things. Opportunity definitely knocks every door, right? So, but we have to see whether we are ready to open the door or not, whether we are ready to embrace it wholeheartedly or not. Because what happens with technology advancement in skills and all, it's a lot of information, lot of availability of resources, and so many things are there that we become like it becomes difficult for the children to accept, or like to decide what to accept and what not to accept. So because everyone's expectations also increase, whether it is parents or teachers or wherever they are, whether at boarding school or at home, anywhere. So parents' expectations, social acknowledgement, then peer pressure, teachers, schools, everything plays an indispensable role in the overall development of the child. So learning becomes handy, of course, because every resource is available. You can get anything, whatever you want. But then what about the imagination? What about the creativity? What about those talents, inherent feelings of the children? So that is very important to be taken care of. So we just cannot make them, turn them into machines. We have to give them chance to tread the path, to tread the road which they have never taken. So I think whether it is at school, like day school, or whether it is in the boarding school. So this kind of freedom the children need to be given, so that technology is just been taken as a booster, and but the control, the total control, the remote has to be in the hands of either the child or who takes the decision for the child. But of course, then again, the liberty has to be given to the child, because it is ultimately his life. So as the parents, as the teachers, or anyone at the boarding school or at home, they can only be the facilitators. Now instead, for the teachers also is the term which is like, which coins in today's scenario, is facilitator. We are just the facilitators. We just help them, that's it. Otherwise they have to find their own right path. And because everything is just a click away, and but these five fingers, they are so different, and they have to, like, how to turn it into a fist, or how to, like, keep them separate. That is the thing which we need to give them. And I think when they understand all such kind of things, then they can make everything so possible for them. Then they're not going to repent throughout their life wherever they have been. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Mrs. Sharma, if I may come to you with the same question.
To answer your question, yes, it has been diluted. So where a boarding school where there was minimal contact with parents, it has now become contact even at the drop of a hat, whether we like it or we don't like it. Having international curriculums, I run 2 international curriculums at my school. And so technology is a part of growing up. We have laptops, we have various devices, and these girls use these devices. Despite having firewalls in place, they find out ways, and Google teaches you how to bypass a firewall. And they revel in the pleasure of bypassing those firewalls and, getting onto those sites which they are banned from at times. Though within a span of some time, we do figure out that we do catch them, but they also figure out how to do it again. There is contact with the parents, whether we desire it or we do not desire it. And so in a way, yes, the helicoptering parent thing, which Mr. Barrett said, is very, very true. And it's more pressure onto the child for that matter. In the absence of technology, in the absence of communication, so much of communication that was happening, the child was essentially taking his or her own decisions. Here is still being pressurized like being in a day school. The mother still wants to know, so how did your test go? And they know that the child has internet facility from this hour to that hour, and the child will somehow manage to reach. There are various sites which we even don't know. We get to know much later as educators, whereby the parent pays up money and the child can keep sending free SMSs and keep getting free SMSs, So there are ways where they are, and they are smart. And they are very, very smart children. So yes, it's been a lot of dilution. But with this dilution is also a sense of responsibility, which comes with the value system, which we place in. And I'm not saying that we are very, very, successful in inculcating those values. Because to inculcate, values can never be inculcated in that sense. They cannot be taught. They have to be modeled and caught. Now, the point is that to get teachers of that caliber where values could be modeled is very difficult in these times. To have another Mr. Barrett at the Doon School is impossible. So Mr. Barrett does go down history. He's been my mentor at the Doon School. And the values that he taught, not just the boys, but also the masters at school, they also go down with him. Those stories go down with him. So yes, there has been a lot of dilution. Boarding schools are not really all those strict anymore. If a harsh word is spoken in the class by evening or maybe within 2 hours, I get a phone call from the parent. What happened to my child? Why my child is being harassed for something. Now harassment has become such a word which is being used. It's overrated now. It's being used like anything. People do not even understand what is the meaning of the word harassment. Right. And they still use it. So technology has its own pros and cons. Yes, it's diluted, to answer your question, Subayu.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. I believe that is the one thing where both of you, one from a day boarding school, the other from a boarding school, would absolutely be in tune. is with regard to parents interfering. However, over these so many months where we have had these webinars, we have also seen the importance of a parent-teacher partnership in the education process, right? I would come to Anita ma'am first and ask you, ma'am, for a non-residential school, how important do you see that partnership? And then, ma'am, I'll ask the same question to Meeta ma'am.
Yes. So see, it has always been important. Like parent, teacher, and students. This trio has to be of a level of understanding if we really want to see the students' development, right? So earlier, like traditional, it was the teacher-centric approach to the education system. Like whatever the teacher will teach is the fact, is the truth, and everyone has to agree to that. But now with the technology and with so much of development, everything has changed. As I earlier mentioned also, the teachers are now facilitators. We all are actually the facilitators. So we have to like understand that an educated man is equivalent to a competent man. Means we have to understand like what do we want? We want a child to be just a competitive child, or we want the child to be really the educated child, so that the child can face the world which is so different, and it is developing each and every second. You can say every minute the technology is changing, every minute new things are coming up. So in this system, the students are actually expected to acquire knowledge and skills by receiving lectures and learning the curriculum. Like this was the earlier thought process. But now the research has proved the real learning does not take place just by taking lectures or by memorizing a body of facts. Instead of that, this 21st century, and we are in 21st century and plus 2021. So this is a competency-based system. If we see our national education policy also, this talks about competency-based system, wherein mastery in learning comes from application system. It's just not listening, it's just not learning the facts, but they should be able to apply whatever they have learned. It is very important. They should have the skills to face the real world situations. It's not like they have to just go and mug up something and then they have to vomit out in the paper 3 hours examination. No, that is just not the fact of life. Of course, that is needed because some assessments are needed at some point of time to go or to move further in life. But of course, to face the real world, we need to be able to apply those learnings what we are having in the classroom. So this is an era of experiential learning, proficiency learning, project-based learning, and flipped learning. It is flipped now. It is not the same one, like from across the side of the table, whatever the person is telling, everyone has to listen with open ears, open eyes, wide open eyes. And whatever, whether it is right or wrong, though teachers are always, it is said to be all, they are always right. But now the students have also become very smart. They cross check, they keep checking whether what our madam is telling or our sir is telling is correct or not. So the traditional approach has taken a twist, and role of a teacher and parent also has become crucial in the holistic development of the child. Because unless and until parents understand what the child is being taught, whether at day school or whether at boarding school, because they cannot be far. It's just by sending their kids to the boarding school, they cannot take away, they cannot wash their hands of the responsibilities. They have to be more alert, asking or knowing what the child is doing, how the child is developing. So how is his behavior? Like all such kind of things are so important. So the teacher-parent partnership is very important in bringing the right kind of education into the child to make him the global citizen. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Mr. Sharma, if I may come to you with
Right.
that one.
Yes. So like Ms. Gupta, very rightly mentioned the word trio. I would say that, we are like a triangle where the three corners of the triangle are students, parents, and teachers. And this triangle cannot be complete without either one of the corners,
Definitely.
All the three are a must. Now, what are we? Either we are in an obtuse triangle or an acute triangle or a right angle triangle. That's a different question and a different, discussion altogether. But these three corners connect, and they need to connect very, very strongly, for the holistic development of that child, whether it's emotional, social, academic, physical, or whatever kind of development, whether it's in terms of core competencies and skills, they need to be connected. So it's the flesh, blood of the parent, which is sent to us, with a lot of anticipations in their heart, and a lot of hope and deep conviction in the values of the school, that the school would do right. And it's the onus of the school to actually give in the best, which the school does. The motivation, the value systems also have to be synchronized. Okay, unless the motivation happens, the growth will not happen. Very few people, I don't know of anyone who doesn't need motivation, for that matter. And it has to be from all sides. It's sometimes even the parents may need counseling from the school side to understand the child. We have to be connected. There are various ways in which the parents can help the school. The parents can also help the school in fundraising. The parents can give expert advice, because they may have expertise in certain areas. They may come in and give talks, and they may come in and inspire people. They may come in and let know the other children in school that this is maybe also one of the careers and professions in which they are excelling. So there is information from that end that can also be given. Parents play a very, very important role in not just bringing up their student, or their child, but also taking the school from strength to strength. And how, if I may give you an example, during the vacation period, it is these parents who end up tying with NGOs to ensure that their children end up getting into real life situations. They end up understanding what real life is. For that matter, getting them into some kind of internships with various organizations. So a lot of it is, and that the parent would only do if the parent also understands the school and the school understands the parent. And that's the reason I personally believe the PTAs and PTMs that happen are not really for academic reasons. When the people come into school and they meet the teachers and they understand, these are the marks. Well, the marks can be sent electronically. It is only to understand the master who teaches the child, and to understand how the child feels in presence of that master, and kind of bridge it up. And for the master to understand what is the family background and what is the child, where is the child coming from. And because the child is coming from this particular, he may need extra in certain other areas of growth. So PTMs are mostly, in my understanding, PTMs are more for that, as compared to just find out the academic progress of a child. Academic progress of a child may improve, may decline, may go by leaps and bounds. That's totally something which depends more on the intellectual or the aptitude level of a child, or the IQ level of a child. But is that all? No, that is not all. Having said that, a lot of kids who may make it to the IITs, and the kids from a boarding school, if they end up doing something similar, the success rate of a boarding school child is much more, as compared to an IITian who's made it, but who can still not succeed or keep hold of that particular job, because the social skills are much less. Now, who is responsible for those social skills? The parents, the society, the school. Whereas here, because I personally believe that they are the three corners of a triangle, and the strength has to be in each side of the triangle for the triangle to sustain itself. And that's where the role of the parents is, whether it's a boarding school or a day school.
Yes, I would like to add here, like this pandemic has actually shown us this strength, the shift from conventional positional roles to proactive roles. Parent and teacher, they have played, and initiatives they have taken, and the support they have rendered for the child being at home, and how he studies and how he takes care of himself is really commendable. Because the roles have been redefined now in this era, in this pandemic situation, and love for their students, love for their children, and courage to embrace the new normal drove them to reach out to the children, helping billions of children. Actually, the teachers have really reached to billions of children cope up with their trauma and fear of the pandemic. And the teachers have stepped into the roles of counselors to support the mental health, and into the parents for their socio-emotional well-being. And the same way, the parents have stepped into the roles of the teachers, like seeing their children, how they are studying, helping them out, like how to read a book. So like everything is so connected. I think this pandemic has brought them together, and this talks about a lot of collaboration and connectivity. Over to Subayu.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That's wonderful. Ma'am, because you have had daughters who have gone to hostels, and Meeta ma'am obviously is going to be the expert on this.
Not exactly to the hostels. You can say
Okay,
yes, they have been to the hostels, but
all
in
right,
the college, not in the school. Yeah.
all right.
So it's little
Well,
different. Yeah.
great. Ma'am, my question is that we have heard throughout this session about certain students being meant for boarding and certain students who are not, right? If there are parents out there who would like that advice, what would differentiate? How do you decide?
Uh, See, every, like it's just like the hand. We have the 5 different fingers. Okay, so and they, like, it is the same hand, but every learner is different. Every child is different. Learners learn differently because they have their different needs. They come from different backgrounds, so they think differently, their skill levels are different, and they encounter different opportunities to learn under different or even the same conditions, because the child can behave differently under same circumstances, or they can behave same under the different circumstances also, like it's just like that. So it again depends upon like how they grow, how their perspective is, how they look at the things. Okay, so resident, when I talk about residential schools, they come as the social equalizer, you can say, the social levelers, because they are almost given the same kind of environment, the same kind of rooms, you can say, the same kind of facilities, whether it is utilities, whether it is food, whatsoever you see. It's the sports ground, is the class, everything is the same, and they have to remain there. So they all, but again, they are unique children. They have their own minds, they develop, they have their own thinking skills, so they have their own perspectives, so they may differ from each other, but then in the process of being together, they develop that kind of understanding and empathy. So here little variation is there when we talk about the students, like in the day schools, because they come in the same school, they come in the same uniform, so that they cannot differentiate themselves from others. They are being taught by the same teachers, they are being provided the same opportunities, but still they go back to their own homes every day. So that again brings the differences. So in that sense, if I see, like, of course the boarding schools definitely help them, but then it needs to be very understanding, because whatever the conditions are, whether they live under the same conditions irrespective of caste and creed, staying together away from home develops a strong bond of understanding. They feel crying, like sharing their thoughts, like using each other's shoulders, like it's just like that kind of connectivity what they develop, that somehow is lacking in the students, because that's why we, like, this happens, that like bullying and fights and all these small things, these keep happening everywhere, whether boarding or day boarding school. But still there is a difference in the day school and the boarding school. They could face the same problems, but ultimately they can reach to the same solutions, sitting together or thinking together, connecting together. But that personalization leads to actually increased engagement, and that brings in the desired emotional connect, strengthening their competences and helping in exchange of ideas, and which is very much needed in this era of transformation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Mr. Sharma, you've had years of experience with boarding school students, so I'm
Yeah,
guessing
really,
you've
I
seen
do
both ends of the spectrum.
have.
So Shivayu, I remember some time ago, Mr. Barrett saying that there were times when the parents would come in and he would ask the parents to take the child back home out of the boarding school, because he felt that the child was not to fit into a boarding school. any school, whether a day school or a boarding school, would want to see the children succeed in all aspects of growth. And I firmly believe that boarding schools are really not everybody's cup of tea. Now, how do you figure out whether a boarding school is for your child or not? A lot has to be kind of, the temperament of the child, for that matter. What is the temperament of the child? What is the personality type of the child? Is the child, an introvert or an extrovert? Because if the parent is putting the introvert child into a school so that he or she becomes an extrovert, that's really not possible. You cannot change the DNA. You can temper with it, not the DNA, but temper with the environment to bring about a little change. But that's really not the intention of any boarding school, to change the child. And we can't change the child. We can only provide circumstances for the child to excel. So it depends upon the adaptability of the child. It depends upon the personality type, the temperament of the child, whether the child is the value system with which the child has been brought up, whether the child is accepting of things, or whether the child is, kind of suffering with the self-entitlement kind of a issue. So those kind of things, those kind of facts should be considered before sending a child to a boarding school. Academics, as I've said, I'm really, really not talking about. But there are 4 kinds of questions that we need to consider before thinking of even a boarding school. And these 4, out of which I completely rule out one, is the IQ. IQ should be there, of a high average IQ is required. However, the 3 other Qs are the most important. The social quotient, the emotional quotient, and the most important of these is the adversity quotient. They are tough places to dwell. They are tough places to, grow up. But if you can fight it out through a boarding school, you will fit in anywhere. You will succeed. You will figure it out somewhere eventually in your life, and you will do well for yourself. So these are kind of things. Then, of course, you should also look into the school, whether you want, if it's a girl, you would want her to kind of grow up with all kinds of traditions. Why a girl? Even a boy for that matter. So is the school secular, yet brings in values and brings in about all the traditions of the country and other countries and all that stuff kind of thing. But most importantly, it is the adversity quotient, which is very, very difficult to judge in a child who is just 11 or 12 years old, But yes, the emotional and the social quotient, can figure out. So maybe a personality test could really help out, but even the personality tests are not foolproof for that matter.
Yeah, they're not. Yes.
Wonderful, ma'am. Those are the questions that I had. If you want to add anything else, you're more than welcome to.
I would just say, I head the Mussoorie International School. If you have girls and if you know girls who want to go into a good boarding school, send them to me.
Yeah, sure. It's so well heard about that school that everyone would love to go over there. But still, it's very difficult actually for the parents to decide whether to send or not. They think about so many things. They see the kind of children who come over there, the background. Like now the parents have become more aware, you can say. And so they want to see the best environment, what can be given to the children so that they can be developed into a full grown, very confident child. So that
my answer to Ms. Gupta is that there is a big bad world waiting for each of the children who grow up in residential schools and non-residential schools. How long can you protect your child? How long can you live the child's fears and live the child's academic tests and live the child's happiness and sadness? The child has to live his or her own life. We can only be happy in their happiness and sad in their sadness, but we can't live their lives. So I think people should just give up this fear factor, and trust. And if they resonate with what the school is doing, just go ahead and send your kids. We will give us girls, we send you back ladies. Ladies who are wonderful, who will make this world a better place for not just you and me, but for the entire human race.
Yeah, definitely. Because every parent wants that. So I think that can be left to the parents to decide what do they want. They have to analyze the surrounding and the facilities and what they want, the unique learning environment for their child. So let them decide. And then, because they have to see like what kind of competencies the child is going to be fostered with. So depending upon that, the parents should be given, and I have also taken that step, that like it's so difficult. Everyone used to tell me that I would never be able to allow my daughters to go away from me. But I also took, when the time came, I took the strong step and sent them so far from me. Like now it's almost 2 years. I have not seen my daughter also because of the pandemic situation. So like we have to overcome all those fears if we really want our children to grow up into a global citizen. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think all of us took note of those wonderful words from the great Michael Jackson. Well, it's time for me to hand this over to Achin. Achin, for your vote of thanks, I think you have quite a lot to thank for. This is me signing off.
Yeah.
Achin, over to you.
Yeah, really a wonderful session, Shubhayu. So I think one of our best sessions. Like I really love the way this entire panel discussion went about. Very seamless and very honest and heartfelt with I'll say heartfelt views, strong views. That's what we look forward to in a panel discussion. Barrett sir, couldn't thank you enough. I think you really took us to a different world, and the way you deliberated on the topic, and the way you correlated and joined all the dots, I guess that speaks volumes about your experience and maturity, and that's what you really make each and every Together for Education session really special. So the way, whether it be the similarity, the way you drew parallel lines between the lives of tea planters and how in earlier decades, a lot of their children used to come to boarding schools, and how the kind of discipline that they learned in boarding schools helped them later in life. To the fact that boarding schools have contributed a lot to the armed forces of the country, as we all know. And also, I think some of the softer aspects that you mentioned, with a very balanced approach, like beet, eating raw Maggie, hard bits, cold early morning baths, really reminded me of my own hostel days during college life. I think, and also to a very mature overall perspective, very balanced one. And I think one thing that you mentioned, day boarding schools in cities, where up to some extent, I guess, pros and cons of both boarding schools as well as day schools. So might we will deliberate on that in details in a later session, but really a wonderful start, sir, you gave us. Also, Anita ma'am, I think what I really liked about the way you deliberated on the entire topic was the fact that you had some strong views and you were completely sure about it. Some of the facts that you mentioned, like be it competency-based system and how things have changed with regard to role of teachers today as facilitators, which we completely agree with, and boarding schools as social equalizers that Burrett also stressed on. And I'm really happy to note the fact that in spite of challenges and inhibitions, and that happens to all parents, the fact that you sent your daughters to boarding school, and I'm sure that once things become normal, you get to meet them soon. And our best wishes for their future. I think, thank you so much for being a part of this. Meeta ma'am, very elegant deliberation. The fact that you're a strong advocate of boarding schools and how logically you deliberated on it really made it wonderful. And some of the aspects that you mentioned, like to start with, the way you mentioned about Barrett sir, we just couldn't agree more. In fact, Barrett sir has been our mentor at Notebook. As a senior advisor, he has really contributed to each and every step, be it in terms of delivering the pedagogy or be it other aspects. We all really look up to him. So I think completely agree with you on that. Also, some other aspects that you mentioned, be it how technology and parent intervention has changed the scenario, how words like harassment are being used so frequently, and the fact that the beautiful triangle that you drew, all of us could instantly connect with it. I think another aspect that you mentioned, adaptability, personality, and temperament. So I think some very important takeaways And these, I guess, are the spirit of the evening. I think wonderful deliberation, one of our great sessions that we had. I thank all members of the audience for being with us here today. We look forward to your continued support in the days to come. Thank you, take care, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Subhayu.
Our pleasure, ma'am. Thank you.